He aula halawai anae molalei tala alapanoa ke kula o ku mano mano tūni hita noho a mauna lahi lahi ho maha kui ka wai o lua lei. Le ana anu uanu I ke kamakahala I pauku I me ka ahihi. I hohi hino I au na noho I oe o ka ukule na paano I he I ke hao helu lulima e te aloha e ai. E ia au ke kilohana I ke konana ka maali e huli ana o kohale I maui nei e nā nana I kamakani helau awa o waipi o wai manu. Helu aku nā puu a peli ai o puu wa o puu anahulo o pili no me kalahi kiola I ke komokunu ila o Hawaiʻi. Ke kau nei o Hawaiʻi luna me helu pela. Ka lele oni ke po o kaino nā pele o kula ka makalewua ha aku kele kula. Nui ta ua ai o ikua kamalama hei ke hao le helu luli mai te aloha ai. Aloha nui kākou. Kunou ha'a noho I ke kanaka mea ole, mamua o kou, mamua ho'i o ke pae kūpanaha noho'i. I'm really so honored to be here, and thank you for that incredible introduction. I feel so inadequate, I must admit, because the personnel standing on this pie, there's lots of mana, and so I feel like our chairs are too close together to account for the mana that encompasses this incredible dais as we have here. That Oli Aloha is written by Isabella Haleala Miller Deshe, great-grandmother of one of my most important people, Mahi Beamer. And Isabella had roots on Maui, Hawaii, and Oahu, and she finally had her longtime home at Halehuki, but also here in Kaimuki. And just in talking about this notion of coded, which we're going to hopefully unpack a little bit, at least, or attempt to unpack a little bit, there is a recording of Isabella with this mele, which is how we learn the mele. So Uncle Mahi taught me the lyrics, and then we would learn actually how to do it from great-grandma. And what's so funny about it is, by the time there were several takes, you could tell several takes, she was doing it over and over and over again. Well, the chant itself starts, halawai anai molale kala. But we chant eyaula halawai anai because in the recording that we learned from, she started eyaula halawai anai. But the second pauku starts, eyau kikilohana ikekona nakamalie. And so we had always thought that she had done it so many times that day that particular take, she had made this mistake. And so in our mind, when we chant the chant, we have Isabella rolling her eyes, starting in the wrong verse, and then reverting back to the beginning. And so for us, it's one of those if you know things. And even though Halawai Anai is the actual lyric of the first pauku, according to her hand, we chant Eyaula Halawai Anai because that's how she taught us from her recording. And so it's one of those funny things with us who do Halawai Anai and who have this affinity for the Beamer family, because it is one of those coded, if you know, you knows. And if you don't know, it doesn't matter, because it's not for you anyway. And so part of the fabulosity of a panel like this is, ultimately, I have to again apologize that English is an inadequate language, really, for us to have a discussion on the coding of Hawaiian language. So not only do we have to uncode the ʻōlelo part, we have to uncode and then translate to the coded English version of the uncoded ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. So you understand then we're doing double and triple and quadruple duty trying to figure out all of this kalamai mess. So lucky we have really smart people to share the stage, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Snowbird Puananiopaoakalani Bento kalamai. I know her name, that's why I said it, but I cannot see it. She's kumuhula of the award-winning Halau Kapahula o Kaleilehua and a cultural consultant for the Kamehameha schools. Raised in the tiny Taro Patch Valley of Pauoa on the island of Oahu, she is a composer, vocalist, teacher, and advocate for acquiring traditional ways of learning and knowing through hula and all that it encompasses. Kahikina de Silva is a kupa of Ka'ohau Oahu. She is a kumuhula in her mother's halau mohala ilima and an associate professor at Kauai Huelani Center for Hawaiian Language, University of Hawaii at Mānoa, where she earned a BA in Hawaiian language, an MA in English, and a PhD in political science. We're going to talk to her plenty today. Kīhei de Silva, named after his father's best friend Thomas Kīhei Brown, is Hilo-born to families rooted in Ka'u, Honaunau, and Ku'kaniloko. He is the researcher writer for Halau Mohala Ilima, which he and his wife Mapuana, Auntie Mapu is here, founded in 1976. He is the author of a book of essays on mele for Moko Kiave, co-author with Pi'olani Mota of Lina Machado, Songbird of Hawaiʻi, and co-composer of a number of songs which we all know and hold dear to our own hearts, including Hano Hano Wailea with Mo Keale, Mapuna Kahaloa Kailua with Robert Casimiro, Ehu Ehu Mai Nei o Mānoa with Mua, and Ulupo Nui with Zachary Lam. Finally, Kīhei Nahale-ā is a musician and founding member of Project Kuleana. Project Kuleana was created to share the perspective that kuleana is what makes music Hawaiian. A kuleana to the aina and our strong ancestral connection to it. Originally from Keaukaha, Hawaiʻi, Kīhei moved to Ko'olauloa in 2002 and has worked the past 10 years in developing collaborative community-based initiatives that create positive, sustainable impacts for the aina and its people. He is the Sustainability Educational Program Manager at Brigham Young University of Hawaii. Would you all give everyone a round of applause, please? So before we commence on this journey, I do want to thank Stacy for being our timekeeper today. God bless him, and good luck to him. This discussion topic number 1 will take up the next 40 minutes with 8 to 10 minutes on each panel. I'm just saying this for the camera and for YouTube so they know that I said what we're supposed to do. What happens from here on out is really, I'm leaving up to the powers that be. And so the question here is, please share examples of coded messages in oral and oral texts, ʻōlelo, ʻoli, or that is the practice of ʻoli in mele. And please share your own thoughts on the meaningfulness of these coded messages using kauna, metaphor, symbols. How was this coded practice part of our culture? Any thoughts on how they function? Can I just acknowledge, please, Professor Kosasa for the questions as well? Thank you, Karen, for these questions. Yes. Any thoughts on how that's partly me taking responsibility for reading them, but deferring responsibility to her for writing them, okay? Any thoughts on how they functioned strategically to provide meaning to some listeners and not others? For example, settlers and foreigners who did not understand the language after the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. And so obviously setting the stage for really understanding from a Hawaiian perspective the role of well, in English, what we're using today as code, and I think multi-layers of meaning from the Hawaiian mindset. Over to you, Kumu.
Oh my goodness. Testing 1, 2. Can you hear my Hawaiian Airlines voice? Oh, there you go. Aloha mai kako. Wow, that's a great question. I think to build a little bit of context, I did select 2 mele that I wouldn't mind to take a look at. Both are current compositions. So the first one that we'll take a look at is written by a dear friend. His name is Kaliko Baker. He is a kumu ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi at the University of Hawaii, Mānoa. But I know Kaliko and his wife, Haili Opua Baker, who is, she teaches out of the theater program also at the University of Hawaii program at Mānoa. But I know them in the context that we worked on Hawaiian language hanakeaka. And so that's theater through the Hawaiian language. And having to look at mo'olelo in particular, I joined them on the journey of Kamapua'a. And from the journey of Kamapua'a, and we know that Kamapua'a, he's kolohe, but he's kolohe for a purpose. And he kind of is, he's different. He rubs people the wrong way a little bit. He doesn't always listen. But there's a certain voice he always listens to, and that's the voice of the grandmother. And everything that he does is to help support the grandmother and the family, even in his koloheness, because it's on purpose. And luckily for me, in that moment, I got to play the grandmother. So I got to learn her perspective and her point of view in his mo'olelo. And so some years later, we were getting ready for Mary Monarch, And one of the things that I've always done with our halau is to try to introduce at least one new thing, whether it be an oli or a hula, one new thing. And that mana'o comes from my teachers that I had in composition and in mele, and that is we value greatly the kahua that we have of those mele that precede us and those kumu who understood all those beautiful complex layers, so that when we think about our time today as Kanaka, we have to be able to write about what we're enduring today, to leave big concrete footprints for our own mo'opuna who come after us and our mamo that come after us to be able to stand on and go, oh, during my tutu's time, this is this. Similarly, how Aaron just shared about learning Halawai Anai from Uncle Mahi Beamer's tutu. How? Through the recording. And then there's the oral aspect of it. And so we got together, Kaliko and I, and actually all of the bakers, Kaliko, Haili, Kaipu, and I said I really wanted to do a hula for Kaho'olawe that talks about aloha aina, those patriots whom we know and those who continue to do the work today and those who will come afterwards, because the work doesn't finish when we're done in this plane. It has to continue. There's a survivance that needs to happen. And so if you take a look at the words here that are shared, it's pretty long. It's gorgeous, but embedded in this mele are the names of the current mo'olono, of Kaho'olawe. Also embedded is the reference to the first 9 who occupied Kaho'olawe. Uncle Charlie Maxwell is actually in this mele. There are people who are in this mele who are no longer with us. Iowane Kapu, Ane Noa, Ka'iana Haili, Noa Aluli. They're all in this mele. And most people wouldn't know it, even just to look at it at the ʻōlelo, until you see how skillfully their names were woven in to talk about what is it that Kaho'olawe reminded us. And you can see it in the hui, where he says, ua aina na pua, ua aloha aina. Ua aina na pua, ua aloha aina. And he translates it as, the people are tenured, patriotic. But even the idea of that ua, that past tense, it has been done. So even if it has not yet been done, it will be done. And so there's a bit of propheticness in that as well. And so we know that this current generation of mo'olono, some of them consist of those who began the training. That's one of the reasons why we were able to get Kaho'olawe back. It was because Kaho'olawe is used for ritual purposes, for makahiki in particular. And so there were things that needed to be learned, ceremony and protocols that needed to be learned, and then carried and then continue to embed into the generations that follow. And so one particular thing I wanted to share about this mele is that Kaliko started to go to Kaho'olawe in the early 90s when he was a student at the university. And then he got married, he and Haile, and then they had a son. Ka'ipolau Makani Olono is his name. And he was named particularly for the kuleana of the mo'olono there on Kaho'olawe. Now Ka'ipu, who is in his mid-20s, continues that work, having been raised in it from baby, having been taken to island and understanding and being part of ceremony from the get-go as one of the ways we embed and encode our own children to understand what their kuleana is going to be as they grow. And so it's not as if he's learning it from a book, he's learning it being on island. He's learning it being in the ceremony. And he's learning it in a way that makes it become more normalized, but I think part of you, from your wailua, from your na'au, you know, all those beautiful things, where he'll never walk away from that kuleana because he knows that's my kuleana. I was raised into it. And so I wanted to point that out here. And then the second mele that I share with you is a mele that is near and dear to my heart. I was asked by Mr. Zachary Lam to be part of this Kahuli ʻŌlelo composers team. And he goes, "Can you be a haku mele mentor?" I said, "Wait, I need mentoring." "What are you talking about?" He goes, "No, you, hello." And is there anyone in your community, because you live in Kapolei, right? And I said, yes. I've been part of the Kapolei community since my grandmother moved into Kapolei. The very first Hawaiian homes division in Kapolei is called Malu Ohai. And it's a mea ho'oli malima, it's a rent to own. And from that time until now, we now live in the Kanehili subdivision. We've been part of the Kapolei community. But even before that, my kila ohana were some of the first to settle in Makakilo on Palailai Street, next to Pu'upalailai. So all my family memories of growing up and having family luau and understanding imu. I grew up with granduncles and uncles. All the men would go and prepare the imu. Our family imu was across the street from the fire station. Smart, yeah. Because, you know, just in case, yeah. And today, across the street from the fire station stands the Makakilo ward of the LDS Church. But in those bushes was our family imu. Every family pa'ina, every graduation, every wedding, every ho'oleva, that's where we made the food. And always the granduncles led, and the uncles and the dads, they did this, and I tagged along with my grandmother and my grandaunts. And I learned how to take care of the imu on that side of kuleana. So I wasn't raised to touch all the things around the imu. That was the kane in our family. So in this particular mele, when we talk about aloha kapolei I kalalo o makali'i, the kahua is actually based on Hi'iaka's travels. As she comes from Wai'anae, heading back from Kauai, and she comes up over the Wai'anae Mountains, and she stands at Pohakea Pass, and she takes in all of the moku of Ewa. And there's certain words that she uses that tells you, these are the ways that we saw what Ewa looked like, glowing with ma'o. And the kai was the color of the manauea limu that proliferated Pu'uloa and Honolulu area. And that at Pu'uokapolei, where Kapo was, her elder sister, Wahine o Ma'o strung a lei kukui for her. And that becomes the name of the first subdivision, Malu Ohai. So we see in this particular mele, all the subdivisions in order that they were built, and all the geographical boundaries from Mauka to Makai that was and that currently are. So that when you drive on the freeway, and I'll close with this mana'o, when you drive on the freeway heading towards Pu'umakakilo, which unfortunately does not look like it did when I first started going to Nanakuli, because I was actually a kupu of Nanakuli for 23 years. That mountain has greatly decreased. That when people look down onto the plains of Ewa, that they know that those extra pu'u that they're seeing are not the pu'u of the landscape that was there. Those are man-made. And that this love of my tutu, who made that place her home, permeates everything that we do today, so that we can keep giving our grandchildren the worldview that they had. ʻŌlelo, mahalo.
Well, we will certainly have to return to so much of what Snow very generously and graciously shared with us. But speaking in terms of being raised in Kuleana, I wonder if we might now turn to Kumuhula Kahikina de Silva, as she sits next to the gentleman responsible for raising her in the Kuleana. Over to you, Kumo.
I think we can all say that, everybody sitting up here, that we've all been raised into these kuleanas, so mahalo for that. Aloha kākou. Before I begin, I have to apologize for coming with an undressed papale, but I was just gifted it today from Auntie Sue Pignataro, made with the lauhala from Ulupo, and as soon as she put it on my head, I couldn't take it off. So it's supposed to have, ornamentation, but today just the pavehe will be enough. As you can probably tell from all the letters after my name, which are also his fault, I just am a real nerd. I love to think and study and learn from people, and living and through their penmanship and what they've left for us to read and enjoy. And that is really because of him and that nerdiness, it is what brought me here. So when I really started geeking out about mele, I think it begins, of course, before you realize its beginning. And growing up in the halau, where we're constantly surrounded with mele and with hula and with oli and with composition, there's really no way to not feel connected to these words of our kupuna. But starting to think about mele as more than what we first might see, I think I would say really began with mentors like Noe Silva, who I'm looking at right now, mahalo kumu, and Leilani Basham, and even John Osorio, for their work in helping us to acknowledge the coding of knowledge in mele and to help us begin to learn how to decode it for ourselves in whatever language that we are most comfortable in. And that started in growing my interest, really began with the connection between the culture that mele represents and continues to contain for us and our political position. And that's one of my favorite things that Haunani K. Trask, from whom this project began, I believe. One of the things that she writes is that, and I'm going to paraphrase here, so I call him this is not the word for word, we are not American, we will never be American, we will die as Hawaiians, that's the best. But paraphrasing her words, that in order for us to continue as a people, we really need to be advancing ourselves culturally and politically, that the two go together. And that is when we are most ourselves, and that is when we are most effective as a people. So I think the work that people like Noi and others have done to show us how mele hold us politically as a people really began my interest in thinking about these thoughts that come with mele. And probably the most salient examples come from the Buke Mele Lahui, right? The book that was compiled of mele that were written in response to not only the overthrow, but also the 1895 counter-revolution, led in part by Wilcox. And is mele after mele just praising our people, expressing aloha for our aina and for our lahui, and restating that this is a lahui that will not die, that we will not give up, and that we are a people. And so that's where my thinking begins of all of this. Interestingly enough, it veers very quickly into a completely different area, which really isn't that different. Today we have Mauna Kea as a really good example. We have Hunana Niho that's come out of it, and how good our people have become on knowing and composing mele that express our lahuiness in these times of political strife and in these times of pilikia, we're really good at responding and composing mele or performing mele that say we are still here. The question for me that comes out of that is, well, what are we doing on the downtime, right? What kinds of mele and practices do we continue as a people that retain our connections when we're not in the middle of a road, blocking equipment from making its way to the top of the mountain, or when we're not at the Capitol dancing auʻaʻia every hour on the hour because we're protecting our rights to harvest and steward our aina as we need to. What are we doing at those moments? And the funny thing is, when you look back at those mele from the Buke Mele Lahui, like the answer begins there for me. A lot of those mele, they are very political, and they're dealing with counter-revolutions and overthrows and all of these kinds of things. But the language that is held in, the language in which these thoughts are expressed, is the same language that we still use to write basically love letters, to write our love songs for our family members, for our sweethearts, to write about our love for food and eating, to write about our loves for our children, right? It's the love of the lei that we're wearing and the flowers that make up these lei. It's the same language. We get words like nanea and valea and ho'oipo that permeate all of these political songs. And really because it's the same aloha. The same aloha that we feel for our parents and our children and our sweethearts is the same aloha that we feel with the same intensity for our aina and our kings and queens and the people who lead us today and those who have led us through kaho'olawe. It comes from the same place. So the song that I didn't bring a fancy slide for, but I'm going to read you some of the words from it. This is the mele that came to mind that I thought I would share with you today. It's entitled Pipi Kaula. This is the first verse. I'm not going to sing it, but maybe somebody on here with a better voice will help me later. This is the first verse. Pipi Kaula, limu kohu, ni oi vela. Lomi lomi aku, ina mona, ula ula salt. So if we're talking code, then to me that's what this is. The fewest number of words that you can have in order to express the deepest mana'o and the deepest connection in a way that somebody not understanding what ula ula salt means to us, they don't know. Yeah, and they're not gonna know. So this is where I'm thinking, right? Is what do we do with our downtime, and how are we spending it? Some of my favorite memories of songs like this are sitting in Hale Ke Aloha. That was Auntie Tammy and Uncle Danny Smith and their wonderful Hawaiian food restaurant in Kailua. And the best evenings were when Keoho would come to sing music, and they would stand there and we'd all have our pipi kaula, limu kohu, ni oi vela, ina mona, ula ula salt laid out in front of us, and they're singing what we're eating. So these mele, right, are not just encoded philosophies. They're not just hypotheses. They're not just our poetic selves, but they're really experience-based. And the experiences that we have with all of these parts of our lives as Hawaiians, that becomes encoded in these mele. Now, what worries me, I think the reason why we still have to go back to those mele lahui and composing mele lahui that are very clear about who we are and what we need, is that all of these practices and resources are also those that are in the most danger in these moments, right? So I'm reading and thinking about ula ula salt at the same time that the salt beds in Hanapepe have been threatened by flooding, not of the result of natural processes, but because of settler colonialism and because of all of those systems that are in place that make it easier for those activities to take place and harder for people like those ohana to take care of their kuleana. That really benefits all of us and those generations to come. So it seems like a simple mele, and it seems like just a good, fun drinking song, which it is. We should always still have fun. That's why we play, right? That's why mele is play. Should have fun. But with that, right, it comes with a reminder of the importance of all of these aspects. And they're not just things that we sing about, but they're things that we want to continue to enjoy and continue to prosper from. And that mele should in turn become inspiration for us to gather and to be a lahui around our mele as well. Mahalo.
Kīhei Nahale-ā is also already reading my mind, because I was going to turn to Kapu and say, can I go out of order? Mahalo. You know why? In the Pacific way, the most powerful mana people speak last. And so it would be awkward for us to have Uncle Kīhei speak now, because the rest of us, even though Kīhei is the oldest of our generation, he's still our generation. And so if it's okay, kalamai anakale, e skip anavo ya oe, I mea e hoi mai ya oe, mahope. There's so much I want to come back to too about Pukemele Lahui as we prepare for Uncle Kīhei, but I'll leave that. And so in terms of, and you know, I think ultimately, and I'm sure all of the panels circle back to this notion of kuleana and the different ways that we embrace, activate, take on our different kuleana, as has to do with the expertise of the different panels that have taken this stage as a part of this series. And so I think kuleana for me has become this term so locked in baggage that it just becomes the buzzword. It's our kuleana. And we don't really understand the depth and the gravity of what the term actually means and what it expects and what it entails. But it's something I think resonates so much here. And so in that way then, I turn over to Project Kuleana. But also am really interested, and Kīhei and I just talked on the way over here about the challenges, and whether you go here or not, but the challenges, again, of using English to decode mana'o Hawaiʻi, if not ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. And so, over to you, young one. Yeah.
Wow. I will also say this, although I'm kind of the older one of this generation, I'm the youngest one in the sense of the capacity to articulate in a way that, no, I'm telling you right now, I'm not like, wow. I'm blown away. And it was very much, I just gotta qualify myself by saying that my whole reason for being here is because I'm a very drama kid. I'm very drama. A lot of my...
That's on video?
Yep. It's there. Yeah. No, but I mean that in a way, like I was not able to separate who I am without acknowledging the trauma in my life. I cannot, and I wish I could, because for some people they think it's a weakness, but in my family, I don't care how you look at me. I don't care how you judge me for my mom being on Haole and my dad being on Hawaiian, that, for what it was. We just who we are. And that came with a lot of fights, getting picked on by the kids, going on the bus in the homestead, rocks thrown at our house, because every time the cops came to the homestead, they thought my mom was the one that called the cops. Being born and having blonde hair, when we was kind of blondies, and being treated as like being special in our family because we was the most hapa, and thinking that meant status. Being the boys, the ones that carried the last name, so we special. So every time we went to our grandma's house, we knew my cousin had to ride the bike down Keokaha store and grab more poi, and we got to eat the poi first, and we got to eat all the dry opai first, and we could do whatever we liked in the poi. We could throw the opai in the poi and scoop them out with a spoon, and my grandma wouldn't say anything. But if anybody else did that, cracks. So we were spoiled. But I didn't know I was spoiled. I just thought I was who I was. But the biggest thing that I was embarrassed about, or I struggled with, was when we went to Luau, and that's where I would hate going to Luau in a way. And this is gonna sound kind of awkward. We named after the same guy. And it is quite a, now I see it as an honor. But when I was growing up, when I was young, I used to like, oh man, is Uncle Kīhei gonna be at this party? Because I'm gonna have to sit on his lap. Well, all my cousins are gonna be playing out in Wailoa Park on the grass, and I gotta sit on his lap a little while, like. And I was thinking like, what is this? And then, okay, you can go. Okay, all right, I'm gonna play with my cousins. And then we would sit there, and then we go to the line, and they'd look at you. Are you gonna take this opihi? Ole. Oh, no, thank you. That's what I said, not ole. No, thank you. What kind of Hawaiian you don't eat opihi? I don't know. So you just feel like unqualified, just going to a party. And then, but you also had this like expectation of being something. And all my uncles in Hawaii, there was in Hilo, they was kind of known as being entertainers, and there was entertainers, and there were singers and all this kind of stuff. But were we the ones going up to sing with them? No way. I said, come on, sing with us. I was like, nah. What you mean? Come sing. Nah, I don't like it. We're not allowed to do that. We always felt shame or scared. But I think that came with feeling like not in position correctly, not positioned correctly. And so we was too white for be Hawaiian. Then when we went up to the mainland, the continent, now we gotta say, the continent, we went to the continent to see my grandpa. We were the darkies to see them. And I thought my grandpa was the richest man in the world because he had rug in his house. He had two-story house. So I thought, bro, you gotta be rich on a two-story house. He had on basement. Said, you gotta be rich to have on basement. But the ultimate thing that made me realize that he was rich was that he had the grandfather clock. They go ding dong. I said, only rich people get these things. It's stuff I see on TV. We never had that. And but he never judged me. He just saw me as his grandson. But everybody else made me feel awkward. And so I never felt comfortable in either space. I just felt kind of like there. And how does this qualify with encoding? I think it makes a big, big effect on your ability to actually read and encode things when you just don't feel calibrated. I don't know if that's the word to say. And I never felt calibrated. And then, and it wasn't my parents' fault. I think they were struggling to figure that out too. My dad gave up a lot of his identity to make my mom comfortable. And I'll say this about my mom. She was a victim of a lot of abuse and racism. She came from a place that was segregated at her time. And she said, I cannot be here. It's not right. And so she heard this guy say, ask not what your country can do for you, but for what you can do for your country, right? Who is that guy? Kennedy. Why did he say that? Does anybody know? Yes. He right. Right. Part of the reason why was because at that time they were recognized as a country of war. And they still are. Still are. But what he tried to do with that statement was say, we need to create an army of peace. And so he's the one that created the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps, a lot of the training happened in Hawaiʻi. And so my mom joined the Peace Corps to get away from racism. She jumped on a plane, landed in Hilo. They threw her in the back of a truck, drove her to Waipio Valley. And she's like, what is this? And in Waipio Valley, they had this mock village of a Malaysian mock village. And my dad was the truck driver. Yeah. And so, long story short, my grandma basically chose my mom for my dad. And so she never went to Malaysia. Me and my two brothers are her Peace Corps mission. We're the result of this, right? So my mom went through a lot of stuff. And then she was victimized to like that, have that reverse racism, reverse judgment on her. So I'll tell you right now, like, we was proud. Like, I was proud to be a brown. But ignorant kind of proud, not knowing. And we all just left, we also heard these stories about my grandpa, Albert Nahale-ā. Oh, he was this, he was that. I never knew the guy. I was the one that was born right after he died. And that makes a difference. I realize that makes a difference. Now I know that. So, but I still was going through this journey that was always connected with struggle and identity crisis and issue. And I didn't want to be that way. And I actually really wanted to sing. I wanted to try music, but I was so afraid. I was so afraid, and I would then make excuses or misdirect things to that way. And what does this have to do with encoding? Well, the fact that I couldn't receive codes because I was struggling with that, with getting myself calibrated to understand it. And it was my first, so there's these things that I tell kids. I tell them, it's like, okay, in life, you're going to get na'au checks and kupuna intervention in life. And my first na'au check one of my first came from this man right there. I told him this story already, and I'm sorry. I'm going to say it. It's pertinent. But so it's a part of being encoded or being programmed to receive the encoding. So, you know, the Kamehameha School's yearbook. So there was a time where they would give you book covers for the yearbook. Oh, isn't it? Yeah, what's the name of the yearbook? Yeah, it was the name of the yearbook. So on that year, that was at Kamehameha, and I thought I was special because I got accepted. I didn't get accepted the first time. I accepted the second time because David Bagao never come back to school. So, but okay. So I'm picking up the yearbook, and I didn't get my book cover. And I was like, oh, I'd like to get my book cover. So I went back. I said, oh, I didn't get my book cover. Can I get it? She said, well, you should have got one. I said, I didn't get it. Well, I can't give you one now. I said, oh, why? I just couldn't get my book cover. No, you can't have it. I was like, give me the book cover. I got it was so silly. It was over a piece of paper, right? A picture. That's how I thought. And we got into this argument, and she finally just said, here. She gave it to him. This is how I remember it. Maybe it's a little bit accurate, but here it is. And I looked at her, because she gave me such a hard time. I opened up the book cover, and I just ripped it in front of her face. And I threw it in the trash. Or maybe I just threw it on the ground, maybe. I don't know. I was like, yeah, because it's mine. That's how I was, because it's mine. Right? And I went to class. And like 5 minutes later in class, I'm sitting in class, and he comes walking in and he just walks in with the book cover, puts it on my desk. And he says, there. And he wrote this message to me, explaining what the book cover was. And it was a picture of just a simple picture of the fence around Iolani Palace. And he was describing like the importance of why he chose that picture, because it's the thing that protects who we are, and protects our li'i. And we are Papua. I think that was like, I know it's gonna get emotional, I'm sorry. I just gotta go there, because I said, my life is full of drama. So, but it was really a very important nudging that happened my way. And then come to find out, he said, you know, we are named after the same person. So I need you to understand this. Here's your book cover. And my mom would not let that book cover go. She held it, and every time I got stupid, she busted that book cover on me. Oh my gosh. Yeah. She could, oh yeah, she may sit me down. And so I guess for me, encoding and the thing about code is super important. But you gotta be able to earn it. I guess that's what I'm trying to come from. So and this was what I was thinking of at first. So how much minutes I get left? 0. I went already. Oh, okay. I didn't see. No. Well, so that's the story. So I guess my point is that if you really want to receive the code, then you got to calibrate yourself. And that's where I'll point it right there. Yeah.
Leave it to Kīhei, the name and the likeness and the image. Let me just say this about Kīhei's mom. She is the most local Panaeva, Keokaha, Pennsylvania Dutch person you'll ever meet in your entire life. She has no shame. She will put you in your place. Doesn't matter whose child you are. She will also feed you and make sure you get where you need to go. And so, and that's how. It just is how. And so, in terms of calibration, if there's ever a testament to the calibration of someone, to the ways and the trials and the tribulations and the triumphs of Hawaii, Kīhei's mama. This idea of calibration, you heard both Snow and Kahi talk about without using the word, because ultimately, when we need calibration, we go to our kupuna. And we go to these ʻōlelo that have lived with us for generations. And perhaps we live outside of the context of the time in which these ʻōlelo came to be, but nevertheless we return to them because they help us to remember the names of rains and the names of winds and the names of pu'u. And those names of pu'u and those names of winds and those names of rains remind us that we are genealogically connected to the aina upon which and in which we put our feet. And this puke mele lahui, to which Kahi referred to several times, is one of the catalysts for me becoming, and Snow, dare I say, becoming full Kīhei de Silva superfans. And in the reprinting of this puke, there was a release, a reception of sorts at Washington Place. And Snow and I happened to be engaged because in this puke is a song called Ho'okuene Lili'u. And this one mele in that series of mele was written by Lili'u. And the first verse goes, Ya'ue na nea na wakine kona pa'e ana kaleo nahe nahe. And what's fascinating about it is that Lili'u herself wrote out the music on the Queen's letterhead. And so we know what she wanted the song to sound like. And kalamai, from my ethnomusicology thing, it's not a very pretty song. And it's a rather difficult song to sing. It's a hula ku'i style, 2 lines each verse, several verses. But it's basically a song that she writes about the moment that the PG came to arrest her. And so she paints this beautiful picture of herself sitting on the veranda, rocking on the chair, and she listening to the birds in the trees and the breeze wafting. And then she hears the clippity-clop of the horses bringing the carriage over. And she realizes it's the PG coming to arrest her, to take her away. And it's fascinating because, to Kahi's point, there's so much aloha in the song itself, telling this very dramatic thing. And so part of me thinks, again, the ethnomusicological part of me thinks, she meant to marry this text, beautiful text, to a not so beautiful melody in order for us to understand the liminal threshold in which she was living for so much of that part of her life. Well, so Snow sang this song that evening as a part of that evening, but we also got to sit in our chairs, riveted and stuck to our seats with our jaws on the ground as Kīhei de Silva talked about several of the mele from this puke mele lahui, about Lili'u writing these songs as a princess, getting on a train, that was hubbed in Honolulu. And in Honolulu, it was so barren. But the further west Lili'u got, the greener and greener the pastures were. The greener and greener the foliage was. And what's fascinating about it is that we know that in reality, it is the opposite. That the further west you go, the browner and browner the aina is. And the way that Kīhei brings this alive to talk about the encoding of mana'o is that the further and further west you go, the more and more of us brownies are there. And so the further and further west you go, of course, it is verdant with foliage. It is verdant in green, lush valley, because that's where we live. And the closer and closer you come to town, the more and more we've become industrialized, we've become sort of kalamai, but non-brown. And so we just sat there, us little kids, in that moment, like, say more, any more, all the more. And so it is an incredible pleasure, I know, for all of us, and as a sort of observer, it's fascinating to me to see daughter and father look at each other as father and daughter, but also as incredible colleagues to each other. I find that embrace and taking up of kuleana absolutely riveting in itself. And so without further ado, it's very, very happy to turn the microphone and this time over to none other than Kīhei de Silva. Mahalo.
I'm not good at being held up. I'm good at hiding behind or being the backbone to someone who stands in front of me all the time. So thank you. And it scares me because I don't think of myself as that smart or that brilliant. But I'll start with this. Ka'aia ka'alihi a'o po'akuku. It's a line from Auaia, and since this is an Auaia event, we can't go without at least mentioning one line that maybe makes sense to us in a chant that has been coded so long ago that our understanding of it is limited, that we are not calibrated to know all of it. We know from Lili'u's own translation that the sentiment of the chant is hold fast, child, to your heritage. Ka'ia ka'alihi a'opahakuku is one of the few lines that, after 40 years of looking at it, makes actual coded sense to me. And alihi is the line that runs on the top and the bottom of a lay net, a gill net. And the line on top is called getting old, can't remember. I knew it half an hour ago. Anybody remember? Anyway, there you go. The alihi pikoi, it's the line that holds the floats, to which the floats are tied. The bottom is the alihi pohaku. Pohaku is the line, the alihi pohaku is a line to which the pohaku, the sinkers, are attached. If that pohaku line, the alihi pohaku, is ka'ia, it's tumbling, it's loosened, it's released. It isn't holding, it isn't doing its job anymore. So if you have a net where the floats are on top and the bottom is loose, there's no pohaku tied to it, then you've got a net that's just flapping in the current and whipping around in the tide, and it's not doing anything. It's not holding anything in place. For me, the intent of that line, and every line has multiple intents. So the intent of that line, as it reaches out and grabs me, is we still, after all those years since that mele was written, live in a time when the pohakuku are loose. when the net that is supposed to hold us in place, hold us down, keep everything where it belongs, catch the fish, is, for me, making a jump in thinking, mele are those ku, those pohaku ku, those rocks that are tied down to the bottom of our net to hold everything in place. The mele, anchor, 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 anchor. And as we lose our ability to tie the mele to the net, to anchor everything, then we live in this very uncertain world where we are always not stable, not firmly footed, not grounded, always in danger of the next loss and the next loss and the next loss. That mele, in our tradition, because there's so much to say about it. Some people say it's a Kamapua, a legend. Kama is Kamapua. Some people say it's a Maui. Kama Lalavalu is the Kama. Maybe it's just a chakra. In our tradition, it was voiced by Kaiāulu Nui the mad prophet from Maui, who was on his deathbed in Kohala, Hawaiʻi Island. He is said to have chanted a long prophetic chant, Hawaiʻi, and ʻŌiwi is supposed to have been part of it. It was composed in maybe 1780, shortly after Cook's arrival. And in our interpretation, and there are many, as I said, it's a warning to everybody that we ought to make sure that our nets are secure, our nets are in place, and then for me that our mele are attached, that our understanding is attached to everything, otherwise we're loose. On the other side of the pie, Haina, in 1778, on the eve of Cook's arrival, another mele was composed, this one by a priest of the Waimea Heiau complex. He had a vision shortly before Cook's arrival, in which he also saw a future for us that was uncertain. And his composition, Ule Pahui Kamoku, is his expression of that same need for us to hold fast, to be secure. In his chant, if you see himself as a speaker of the chant, then he's using an ule pole to push his canoe out past the mud flats in front of Waimea. The stream comes out all muddy, out because the moku of the haole, the tall ships of the white man, are there waiting. And as he approaches, he says that our sacred councils will fall. U ho'ohiolo ta'aha. E tuvale no ke ki'i. Our gods, our ki'i, will just stand there and do nothing. And then there's a turning point. Mana'o e holu kamoku. Many will want to travel on those tall ships of the haole. Go away, lose who they are, be sucked into another world. Then there's a turning point in the chant for me. E tu ita hoeuli. Hold fast, take up the steering paddle and press it to the palekai. Press it to the side of your canoe and wrap your aha around the koa so that you won't be taken away. And then he ends with ahemea oe. Ahemea oe. And if you just translate that literally, oh, you're somebody. But the meaning of the chant is ahemea ole. You will be as nothing if you give yourself over to the tall ships. We only know this, understand it in this way, because we had a coder who transmitted her understanding. Kavena Pukui learned this along with her daughter, Auntie Pat Namaka from her teachers on Kauai, from Keahiluahine, her ancestor, and from Kapua, ancestor. They kept this chant from 1778 in their families, in their lines, in their hula, so that Kavena could tell us in 1778, a priest of Waimea had this dream. And Kavena could translate what for us are like, God, what kind of language is this? Ule pahuitamotu. Ule, push, shove to the island. But she puts it all in context for us, uncodes it for us so that we can understand. Most important thing that Kavena in her translation is, she says, you Hawaiians will be as nothing. That's her final translation of the last line. The warning of this mele is, take up the hoiuli, hold it fast against your canoe. Tie yourself to the koa. Don't be sucked in and become something you're not. Or, back to Auʻaʻia, we will all be net, flapping in the current. We won't have our anchors. Our mele will mean nothing to us because we don't understand them anymore. The sad thing with, I have another mele, but I'm just going to go with it. One of the sad things about ʻŌlelo, as explained by Kavena and as performed by Kavena, is ule pahu ita motu uno ite teleau. What you know of this today is ule pahu ita motu. It is performed today by people who don't understand. It's performed today, for the most part, as a war chant. Here we go, paddling our canoe into battle. But in fact, that interpretation is the very thing that the chant warns us about. It warns us not to be performative. It warns us not to turn something that we should know into something that's going to appeal to an audience that doesn't know. Haunani K-Trax was our classmate. We went to school with her. We loved her. She was years and years ahead of us. It took us so long to catch up to her, which is why I'm glad to say a little bit about Auʻa, and which is why I'm glad to be asked to say something tonight about how we have to take a paddle and go.
I don't even know what to say now. I'm so basking in that. Perhaps then we bring Haunani into the room. I was a graduate assistant for Lili Kala when I was working on my master's degree in music. And luckily, Haunani and I shared a wall. Her office and mine adjoined by said wall. And I remember one evening listening to the Brothers Casimiro, and she came over from her office and you know, those are my classmates. You know Robert's my classmate. Yes, Haunani, I know. Can you turn that down, please? I'm trying to write, and I'm getting distracted because I hear my classmates singing to me. Absolutely. Then the next day, next day I saw her, she came over and she said, why aren't you playing my classmate? Because I know you're in, Dr. Trask. I remember one conversation we had talking about JFK, because JFK was meant to articulate that he planned to announce his running for president in Honolulu, in Hawaii. And so in his campaign, in the pre-campaign, I should say, he had raced across the continent, as it were, and didn't make it to Hawaii by announcement date, and he ended up announcing in Alaska. And that affects the 49th state and the 50th state, et cetera. But he had every intention of announcing in Hawaii that he was running for president against Nixon. And that campaign was so contentious that, and so close in fact, that Nixon called for a recount of Hawaii's votes. And within 50,000 votes, JFK won the election. In the end, they didn't need Hawaii's votes because California had recounted and JFK had seen, but Nixon called for a recount of the votes here. And it was as if Haunani was in the room as she recounted this with the proper citations, and she was a scholar really, with proper citations and we sat down looking at Blunt Report and JFK, and Blunt Report and JFK. I don't really know what the connection necessarily was in the moment, but what was so fascinating about it is, as was my relationship with Lili Kala in partying with Ali'i, how Nani was in this moment, to what Kahi was talking about earlier, with the politics of the period, in order to better understand how our personal and cultural and political politics here really were meant to found and ground our work as Hawaiians, as culture practitioners, as culture people. And that foundation was necessary to, in her words, keep us angry and therefore keep us accountable to ourselves and our kupuna. And so when Uncle Kīhei talks about this au'a, that au'a, as you can see, I think, and you hear in the passion of these incredible panelists, is one in which we live and one with which we live as it is born into who we are as Hawaii in the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd century. The work now then in this particular panel is to open up to Q&A from all of you. And I don't dare to dictate to you the manner in which you might bring your questions to this panel, but I wonder if we might be able to sort of sit in and digest the quality perhaps and the gravity of the kinds of mana'o, which is not a word I use very often, but the kinds of mana'o we seek to gather in a moment like this. Dare I say historic in many ways, as a humble Kanaka, but still, I imagine 50, 75 years from now, this YouTube video will be one of ancestors who have profoundly affected the future of the Lahui. And so I wonder if we might be in that space as we bring questions to this panel. And leave it at that, if you don't mind. But ask questions. I don't mean sit there and don't ask questions. But please do bring your questions up. I'm also happy to sit for a moment. I really am happy to sit for a moment. And that was a lot of ike and a lot of mana shared in a very short time. So we'll be processing for quite some time. I'm also happy to process together as well. Tadia, please.
Mahalo so deeply for what you have shared with us today, especially the words that you chose, decoding and calibration, which I think is applicable to all people everywhere, especially those of us who choose to travel the world and live in places where we weren't born and where we are trying to acculturate, to fit in, because we have fallen in love with the place we decided to remain. So coding and collaboration, wherever you are, is very important, especially for those people that are not moored, are not tied, whose nets are floating around the world, like many of us who are here in Hawaii. So I want to thank you so much, because you have given words to a paradigm and an idea and a concept that many of us did not have the words to express. So again, mahalo nui loa from the depths of my soul. And I love you all. Thank you.
Mahalo. Mahalo. ʻōlelo.
Kind of going off of your comment, Hawaii is a very transient place, and a lot of us are settlers to the islands and have an impact and a responsibility for our presence here. But that's, it's also wrapped up in politics and our daily lives. And I just feel like as settlers, you made a good point that you have to earn the calibration. It's not something that's just handed to you. And I think that's an important point to make. You don't just get to travel the world and settle down somewhere and say that you understand the code if you haven't contributed anything. Do you have any thoughts on what we should be contributing and how we can?
Oh, I ain't about the first guy to talk, but no, I think that's where I was trying to get to a little bit. Was in my own personal. I'm Hawaiian, but I for some reason sat in the deficit mindset for me, not the abundant mindset. But where I'm going with that, where I was trying to get to the point was that I just needed to accept what I had and just allow it to take me in. So accepting so settling here, kuleana is an opportunity. It's not a burden. It should be something that lifts you up. These are quotes from friends, and I agree with all of that. It's a privilege. So you're coming to Hawaii, it's a privilege to be here. And I gotta just talk about this whole goofy regenerative tourism thing going on. I'm sorry, but you're gonna rebrand Hawaii. You don't need to rebrand us. We're not the problem. We're not the problem. We're trying to show you we're the way. And so when I'm saying that, I'm saying that passionately, but part of it and how to do is, anti-Mapuet, Mary Monarchia, because we want to hear, we want to see, we want to know, we want to see. I paid for this, I went to this. You don't necessarily get to see everything. Well, just be quiet. And I'm not saying that to you or anybody, just sit down. Appreciate you out in the room. A lot of us sometimes, and we was just talking about that a little bit about how do we get young people involved, right? Well, you bring them in a room, you tell them, sit down over there and be quiet. And why I'm saying it like that is because it's a cultural practice to be raised that way. It's very Hawaiian. It's not only Hawaiian, but it's very Hawaiian to be like that. And we're kind of getting away from earning your right to be in the room, to be close to the piko, to the kumu. And I'm saying that because it's not only about the text, but it's the delivery of the text, right? E ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e, or e ho mai da ike mai luna mai e, o na mea una no e o na mele, e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai. That's what Uncle was talking about maintaining the integrity of space. And it's the way in which we deliver. So it's also learning how to be in a space and so you don't affect the space. So that the mana can, so the kui ka mana. And that's the best way not to explain it. And I hope I wasn't being aggressive. I was just saying, like, be a part of creating the sacredness of the room. Don't be a part of taking it away. Be a part of enriching it.
Please.
Thank you all so much for the wisdom and beautiful commentary on mele, and for Kīhei for that being vulnerable. That was really beautiful. So thank you. My question is for Kīhei de Silva, of course, because you may think you're super fast, but I'm there's lots of questions, but I'll just ask one. In the beginning, when you were talking, you said that that mele, and I think you were speaking somewhat generally, but maybe you could say more about this. You said that mele are the pohaku. Could you say more about that and how you think, like, for those of us that are tonally challenged, etc. Yeah, if you could just say more generally about how mele functions as pohakuku for maybe all of us in the Lohului.
Mele are the highest expression of our na'au. They, if we understand them, then they connect us to ʻōlelo. And then they connect us to place. And then they connect us to each other. And so the mele are there for us to tie back to the net. So that I have here hale because I was going to talk about it. I ka laʻia o hale pioe, ike I ka nani o Makiʻailana. It sounds so beautiful. Where's hale pioe? Oh, Makiʻailana hu e kamana'o. No, this was written by Samuel Kaili, a reverend who was imprisoned at the time of writing it, imprisoned at Halekava, Oahu prison, out in the swampy waters of Iwilei. And he says, he's there in the beauty of Halepioe. Halepio, prisoner, vai, retained, house where the prisoners are retained. Ike ikanani o Makiʻailana. Makiʻailana, we all think of as that romantic spot where Ilua Aikolu, we go in the rocking chair and we have a wonderful time making love. Makiʻailana in 1895 was a staging ground for the Republican Army, for the bad guys. You didn't go to Makiʻailana to hold your lover's hand. You couldn't even get there because the Army of Occupation occupied Makiʻailana. And if there was any kind of entertainment there at the time, it was not by the Royal Hawaiian Band because they had all given up on not signed it was the government band that held concerts in Kapi'olani Park at the time. So this mele begins by telling us what we think of as something, oh God, what a lovely composition. But no, it's so coded, right? That and if we understand the coding, then it ties us to the story, the history, and then it ties us to the aina, and then it ties us to each other in our continued resistance. And then he goes and he says, E ike kanani o ma'ihi. Ma'ihi is in it's a verb. It means to strip, and figuratively, it means to have lost everything that you have. So he's explaining, as a prisoner of the enemy, he's lost, along with others, everything that he has. But at the same time, he's saying that I am from Ma'ihi, and the Ma'ihi area in Kona is between Kainaliu and Keauho, and the hau o Ma'ihi wind blows down through there, and it stays in its lane. It belongs where it belongs. And he's implying that I am from here. We know how to stay in our lane. What is this foreign government doing, encroaching on what should be our pathway? And then he goes into the refrain that led me to name my granddaughter. He says, He ili ula au he Hawaiʻi. I am an ili ula. I am Hawaiian. So, this simple, apparently, mele from Wuke mele lahui, which could be interpreted, it goes right under the noses and way over the heads of everybody but those for whom it is meant. And that's our pohaku that is tied to our net that holds us down. And then I wrote Ehu Maine o Mānoa based on Halepio Vai, because
award-winning mele.
Because in 2003 we had Doe versus Kamehameha, and the admission policy at Kamehameha schools was deemed racist by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And on the day that that Circuit Court of Appeals was to hold its first hearing, we had floods in Mānoa, so they couldn't have it in Mānoa. And so that's my quoting, Maine o Mānoa, right? There's too much, but we're not hopeful. We're not afraid. And then I'm from Hawaii Island, so I take Mr. Mr. Ka'ili's iliula, and I apply it then to myself. I, am also one of these people who wears the kapahau, the mist, the hau of Ma'ihi. I belong there too. And then he uses haleakala, I think, because haleakala is where Lili'u was raised by Paki and Konia as the Hanai sister of Pauahi. And instead of him saying the palace, Ka'ili sees, look, there's Maki Ailana, there's haleakala. That's where our queen, is still the queen in our heart. So I use the haleakala for Pauahi, Pauahi's house, the sacredness that still underlines it. And then, I alter the mele into a tribute to Pauahi, but with the full understanding that behind it is that Ka'ili, that prisoner's mele for his own queen and for his own island. 100-something years apart, but same situation. Sorry, I got carried away.
Mahalo. Stacy, our esteemed timekeeper, is waving his numbers in front of me. So just in respect to, I just want to acknowledge one more question, and we'll close with this question, then I'll close the panel if you don't mind, but please, Auntie.
What an awesome question. I'm going to turn it over to the English major.
No. I have no contact with young people anymore. I stay in my room most of the time.
I don't mind. I don't mind actually. I don't mind. Before I became a cultural consultant, I was an educator for 27 years at Kamehameha. And I was able to have the experience of teaching from kindergarten all the way through high school. And then for a little while as a lecturer at the University of Hawaii, Mānoa. I noticed in my first year of teaching in the elementary that our children speak differently. Their voices sound different to my ear than the voices of my kupuna. They don't sound like me when we speak English. When I listen to recordings of myself talking in English, I can hear my pidgin underlying. And I'll use my own children as an example of this. My middle niece, when she was about 6 years old, she said, "Auntie, I'm going to go into the living room and I'm going to sit on the couch. On the couch." And I turned and I looked at her and I said, "You going where?" "In the living room." I said, "You mean the parlor?" Because we grew up with saying the word pala. Yeah, we're going to go in the pala. We're going to sit on a couch. Couch. Oh, she says couch. And I started to hear it more and more in the kids that I was working with because I'm trying to teach them ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. And I would say, okay, a cow. And they would say, a cow. And I would say, ah, and they would go, ah, and I go, ka, and they ka, ooh, a cow, a cow. I think that question is brilliant because I'm speaking to the dialectical difference that we hear. But the dialectical difference implies the worldview has changed. The worldview from which our children are coming from is different from that of our grandparents. I was lucky because I was raised by my great-grandmother. Like Kīhei, you had to sit on a color's lap. That's because punahele. Because you were named after him. I was similar, raised on the skirt tails of my tutu lady. And so, how do we then help them to know the words that they're using today and how they express themselves as young Hawaiians? Because a lot of them don't know, honestly, what that even means. For example, I thought everybody grew up with grandma and grandpa who play ukulele and guitar, and we get together and we're going to sing every Sunday after we come home from church. We're going to have dinner and we're going to sing in the parlor and we're going to have ohana time, and everybody does this. And I thought everybody grew up that way. I was lucky. I didn't realize I was lucky to have grown up in a time where I still had kupuna who spoke Hawaiian as manaleo. I didn't know that I was lucky that my speech patterns and the cadence of my voice and the rhythm that I use is still similar to that of my tutu. When my own grandmother had already started to lose that cadence and that rhythm and that pattern because she was raised as a full Hawaiian woman who spoke no Hawaiian. So that becomes the way that we have to think about how do we tether? How do we reconnect them to the net that makes them who they are without making them feel like they're less than? Because that is a real problem. People become fearful of being able to speak in Hawaiian or to act in a Hawaiian way because, oh, you shouldn't talk like that, da-da-da-da-da, because there's so many critics. How do we empower them? And part of it is understanding that mindset of sometimes it may be better for you to listen before you start talking. Pay attention to when to them say, hey, you know what, come sit by me. Or auntie or uncle says, come sit by me, baby. And they just start talking and most of them is like, oh, I'm kind of ready. I mean, how many of us would get all the kind bent out of shape when you get the 25-second, commercial on your iPhone. It's gone funny. 25 seconds, jeez. Yet, when I was a keiki with my tutu lady and all of her siblings and family were speaking in Hawaiian, and I would try to, but puna, but tutu. And I still remember it very distinctly. She turned to me and she said, "Kamali'i." With these words. I put my it's coding itself. Kuli kuli ko waha. Wala awa uau me ke ia anu makua. He keiki wale hoi oe. You be quiet. And it wasn't gentle. The use of that word is not gentle. You be quiet. The adults are talking here. It's a way to remind us that there is a certain way of being that we inherit merely by listening and observing and being in the space. And if we can encourage our young people in that way, as much as we encourage them to speak your truth, that's the way now, yeah, especially behind a keyboard and on social media. Speak your truth. Please know the truth first, love. And I say that with all humbleness, Auntie, because it is a crux. And so my thing is, we love on our babies. We love on them, and we lovingly correct, and we lovingly redirect their paths. So when they find their voice, we can go, yes, like that. Keep going, babe. You got this.
Kalama, I gotta say one thing. And I'll be brief, but Auntie, you're right. And you know, this disconnect of communication between kupuna and opio is worldwide. Like kupuna in Japan, get hard to understand that kids with that too. And so, but the thing is, that's why hula and traditional practices of our culture is important to get our kids in early. And they have to be raised in it more. It's not like, it has to be part of their upbringing, so that the way to pronounce, the way to express is important. And I think for us with Project Kuleana, we realized that it was harder to get the kids access to our kupuna or our makua that understood those things. So we decided to try to use this technology that was being used to distract them from our community, to try to put the community in the technology to get them back to recognizing the value of their neighbors, of their own aina. And so I just want to add that in, because I think that's part of trying to bridge that, so that the kids can really accept and appreciate that the actual heroes they have the same bloodline and DNA as them. It's super important. And so for me, this walk I am not the one. It is my daughter and my son that is going to be prepared to kui kamana. And one is chosen, one is on his way. I see you up there, Kumu. But they have to make that choice. But we have to make sure it's available to them, and they gotta be set up in a way so when they choose, turn them on. And that's why. So it was an awesome question you said to me.
Mahalo. I do want to respond to that very quickly, and then turn this over to close the panel, and really come back to the face value of your question about access to English by Native Hawaiian population, and what that access to English has provided for us. I'll tell a personal story. When I first got into Kamehameha at 7th grade, and I'm a little bit touchy that this will be no nakau akau, but I think it's relevant. Snowbird was in 8th grade, and I was in 7th grade, Miss Woody's English class, and we had to go and introduce ourselves to the class, where we were from, and we're simple. What is your name and where are you from? And if you know me, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I like to talk to people. But I had my father's pure Samoan, rather formidable gentleman, and a significant portion of my childhood, I lived in Samoa. And so to Snowbird's point, I picked up the idiosyncrasies of the sound of a Samoan child and came to Kamehameha and Miss Woody's class, please come to the front and introduce yourself. And I said, yeah, good morning. My name is Erin Salā, and I live in Kailua with my grandma. And so laughing. And that fueled a fury in me that obviously there are daddy issues embroiled. And I flew across the room. And I never got to, like, first day of Kamehameha, of course, mom was like, what are you thinking? I went to that school. You have a, all those kinds of things. And so there was an attempt, and now I probably, you see, this is where this is touchy. I had to sort of undo my access to English so that I sounded really good speaking English. And so started to read Dr. Seuss, Da cat is in da head. Yeah, duh, you know? And so now this would probably unheard of, but for me it was, children don't know what should and shouldn't happen, or that something is hard or not hard until you tell them, oh, that's hard, you know. Then suddenly it's so hard. And so what I made a point of to learn was access to English that allowed me to express in the most beautiful prose, in the most beautiful poetry, because of that experience. And that experience for me was an empowering one, rather than one of questioning my identity. Because now I have an access to, I know, if you need to know how to use a semicolon, ni nau mai. Because I know how to use a semicolon. But it's that experience. And so when you ask a question about the access to the English language, the challenge that we have is, as people in this 21st, 22nd, again, 23rd century context, is that it isn't so much the access to the language, it's the time we spend in it, because everything is 140 characters. And so our mental capacity has diminished because we're concerned about the activity of that looks like on a public context. So to Uncle Kīhei's point, there are so many of us who much rather sit in the cave and live with the things that we live with so that we can process, so that we can bask, so that we can do. But we're faced with, where are you on social media? And if you don't exist on social media, you're not doing anything. You know, and so then that plays now into this conundrum of access to language and then access to meaning making, that I think we are just, technology moves so quickly. Humans are so slow when it comes to our, you know, what AI will do, what AR is doing, what all of these kinds, and how we leverage the power of that to our own ends, and how we get leveraged by it to its own end. And so then even more so as we close this panel, and thank Stacy and thank Karen and mahalo nui a oe ke hoa Kapulani Landgraf for this invite. Yeah, please, round of applause. All the more important than on behalf of this panel, the sentiment and the meaning and the power that is to au'a. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please, a round of applause for Kumuhula Snowbird, Puananiopaoakalani, Bento, Kumuhula Kahikina de Silva, Kīhei Nahale-ā, Anakala Kīhei de Silva. Please, a round of applause for everyone. Yeah. Yeah,